Buenas and Hafide, the committee is now called back to order. So I'd like to call upon those who want to testify on Bill 104-37. If you can come to the front forward, and I'll be calling you based on sign-in. Okay, thanks. Again, I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues that are here today, Senator Fisher and Senator Taitigui and Senator Dueñas and Senator Brown. So we're moving on to our second item on the agenda. It's Bill number 104-37 LS, sponsored by myself, Senator Sabina Flores Perez, Senator Christopher M. Dueñas, and Senator Christopher Barnett. It's an act to amend Section 3606 D4 of Article 6, Chapter 3, Title 16, Guam Code Annotated, and to amend Section 51202C, 51205B, 51207B of Article 2, Chapter 51, and to amend Section 51301P of Article 3, Chapter 51, and to add a new Article 6 to Chapter 51, all of Title 10, Guam Code Annotated, and to add a new Section 4685 to Chapter 46 of Title 9, Guam Code Annotated, relative to the disposal of junk vehicles. So for some introductory remarks, Bill 104-37 proposes to create a junk vehicle littering law. Guam currently has attempted to use its abandoned vehicle law to rid the island of junk vehicles. The abandoned vehicle law is intended to address both publicly and privately impounded vehicles. Although GPD claims they no longer have an impound lot, the abandoned vehicle law exists to accommodate the disposition of abandoned vehicles. The abandoned vehicle law requires a minimum of 17 days of various notices, including certified mail, that culminates in a public auction for each vehicle disposed of. Bill 104-37 requires only 48 hours of on-site notification, where notice is placed on the vehicle, giving the owner time to remove the vehicle from the site where it was discarded. If the vehicle is unclaimed, it will be removed from the government property and properly disposed of. The bill creates a littering fine of $1,000. The only two defenses to the littering fine are: 1, a report that the vehicle was stolen; 2, proof that the vehicle was sold. The bill requires the last registered owner to pay for the cost of disposal and to pay a service fee to the mayor's office of the village that the vehicle was found to be abandoned. Some may argue that the proof of sale should absolve the registered owner from paying for the disposal costs and service fee. However, the last registered owner had the duty to ensure that the vehicle was lawfully transferred to the purchaser. There is nothing preventing the registered owner from seeking a court judgment against the subsequent owner for these costs. Similarly, insurance covers the cost of disposal of stolen vehicles. According to the executive director of the Mayor's Council, it was stated that there was only one time anyone has ever claimed a junk vehicle, and that would happen when a vehicle was removed from private property by mistake. Other than that, no one has ever claimed a junk vehicle prior to disposal. This bill also makes it a misdemeanor to tamper, deface, or destroy the VIN number of a vehicle in furtherance of a crime or littering violation. So I look forward to the testimony provided by many of the agencies, so thank you for being here. Many of you were invited to the roundtable, and so we look forward to your input. Notices of today were sent to Lieutenant Governor's Office, the Honorable Joshua Tenorio, the Attorney General of Guam, Attorney General Douglas Moylan, the President of the Mayor's Council, Mayor of PD, Honorable Jesse Alec, EPA's Administrator, Walter Leon Guerrero, Chairman of Guam EPA Board of Directors, Mr. Stephen Carbolito, the Director Shimizu of Department of Revenue and Taxation, General Manager of Guam Solid Waste Authority, Mr. Irvin Slike, as well as the Chairman of the Guam Solid Waste Authority Board, Mr. Andrew Gell, Director of Public Works, Director Vince Ariola. We also sent invitations to the GM of the Port Authority of Guam, Roy Respicio, the Acting Chief of the Fire Department, Joey St. Nicholas, Chief of Police, Chief Ignacio, Director of Department of Ag, Ms. Chelsea Munya-Brecht, as well as the Department of Parks and Rec Director, Director Pelletier. So at this time, I would like to invite to those that are here to provide testimony. We will begin with, who do we have here sign up first? Guam EPA. So we have Deputy Director Michelle Lastimosa. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairman. And also, good morning, honorable senators. My name is Michelle Lastimosa. I'm the Deputy Administrator for Guam EPA, and I'll be reading the testimony of our Administrator, Mr. Walter Leon Guerrero. The Guam Environmental Protection Agency opposes Bill 104-37 in its current form. Through Public Law 29-116, Guam EPA administers the Recycling Revolving Fund, which is utilized to remove priority recyclables such as junk vehicles, large white goods, loose tires, and metals at the grassroots level. This program is being conducted in partnership with the Mayor's Council of Guam. On Guam, and with the experience from the MCOG's island-wide environmental cleanup program, in our line of work, it is our opinion that the abandoned vehicles are synonymous with junk vehicles. We should strengthen the language for abandoned vehicles to include junk vehicles and how to differentiate between the two. Junk vehicles, like abandoned vehicles, are often unregistered and may have defaced identification numbers. Junk vehicles, like abandoned vehicles, attract vandals, may be used for hazardous waste dumping, illegal dumping, insurance fraud, accumulate refuse, and may be used as shelters by the homeless. Some motor vehicle parts contain hazardous substances, in addition to gasoline and other fluids, which may be properly disposed of. Abandoned vehicles may include stolen cars, which then become junk vehicles. Among these junk vehicles will be autos that are intact, partly stripped, or burnt out. Drivers may temporarily abandon cars that break down on roadways as they arrange for repairs. However, this is different from a junk car dumped and permanently abandoned. These type of vehicles are not abandoned vehicles, but if left overnight, they become stripped, vandalized, and burnt out, and eventually become junk vehicles. The following factors are usually considered in classifying an abandoned vehicle versus a junk vehicle. 1, condition and appearance. Body damage, missing or flat tires, missing doors or other major parts, broken windshields or windows, garbage or other debris inside the vehicle, and evidence of fire damage, signs of vandalism, trash accumulating around the vehicle. 2, missing or outdated license plates and other documentation, including inspection stickers, registration decals. Although cars have unique identifying numbers and must be registered with DRT, keeping track of them and their owners can be difficult. This is especially true for older vehicles that may be sold and not registered by their new owner, intended for use as spare parts and not transportation. Older cars may be unregistered while an owner plans to restore the vehicle to working order at a later point. 3, location. Parked on public streets or other public property. Property owners or property managers usually must report cars abandoned on private property without the owner's consent. 4, length of time at the location. This can vary from a very short period for roadways or limited access roads to longer periods in parking facilities to somewhere in between for street parking. And then notification and non-response. Guam requires that a notice be applied to cars or sent to registered owners before they can move a vehicle. If the owner does not respond within a specified time frame, the vehicle can be towed. The question is to where? Guam law requires that we tow and store abandoned vehicles, which then initiates the Department of Revenue and Taxation to send out notice to the last registered owner, who has 10 days from the date of receipt of that notice to claim the vehicle. After which time, if the owner does not claim the vehicle, DRT must determine the vehicle's value and either dispose of those of little or no value or arrange for them to be sold. However, if this body sees fit to pass this bill, we offer the following suggestions. 1, maybe consider the repeal of 16 GCA Chapter 3, Section 3606 in lieu of this bill to streamline the process. On page 2, line 21, the Recycling Revolving Fund is now the Zero Waste Revolving Fund as amended in Public Law 36-115. On page 3, we want to include in the definition of depollution, tires. On page 5, posting of notice, We want to include apprehending officers as defined in 10 GCA Chapter 51, Article 2, may post notice on the junk vehicle. And there are about 10 agencies that are defined as apprehending officers. Page 3, line 1, we recommend the definition for junk vehicle to mean a motor vehicle, including a part of a junk vehicle that is damaged, discarded, or disposed of on public or private property without approval by the owners of said property, that is incapable of operating on public streets, roads, and highways, and has no value except as a source of parts or scrap, or where the reasonable transportation and disposal costs defined by 51601G in Title 10 exceed the reasonable salvage value of the vehicle and is visible at any time of the year from a public place or public right-of-way. And then subsection 1 is detrimental to the safety and welfare of the public. 2, tends to reduce the value of private property. 3, invites vandalism. 4, creates a fire hazard. 5, is an attractive nuisance, creating a hazard to the health and safety of minors. 6, produces urban blight, adverse to the maintenance and continuing development of municipalities. And 7, is a public nuisance. Also, in Section 10 GCA Chapter 51, 51306B, we want to include the word junk vehicles as part of the authorization for the Department of Public Works and the Mayor's Council of Guam to contract with recycling companies. So we want to include junk vehicles in addition to abandoned vehicles in that section. Page 5, line 8. We want to include posting of notice to expand on that. A, the Department of Public Works, the Guam Environmental Protection Agency, mayors or their designees may post a notice of public nuisance or notice of abandonment and removal on any junk vehicle found on public property. Section B, we want to add the notice shall be created by the Guam Environmental Protection Agency within 90 days of the enactment of this section. The Attorney General may at any time alter the notice as to form. If the notice is altered by the Attorney General, said altered notice shall be used in place of prior notice. C, the procedures for the abatement and removal of junk vehicles as a public nuisance under this section must provide not less than 48-hour notice of the nature of the nuisance. The notice shall be affixed to the car, and a copy of the notice may either be personally delivered, sent by certified mail with a 5-day return request, or delivered by the United States Postal Service with signature confirmation service to 1, the last known registered owner of the nuisance, 2, each lien holder of record of the nuisance, and 3, the owner or occupant of A, the property of which the nuisance is located, or B, if the nuisance is located on a public right-of-way, the property adjacent to the right-of-way. And then C, Section B, the notice must state that 1, the nuisance must be abated and removed not later than the 5th day after the date of which the notice was personally delivered or mailed. And 2, any request for a hearing must be made before the 5-day period expires. Then Section C, if the post office address of the last known registered owner of the nuisance is unknown, notice may be placed on the nuisance, or if the owner is located, personally delivered. D, if notice is returned undelivered, action to abate the nuisance shall be continued to the date not later than the 6th day of the date of return. E, procedures for the abatement of the removal of a junk vehicle may not apply to a vehicle or vehicle part. 1, that is completely enclosed in a building in a lawful manner and is not visible from the street or other public or private property. Or 2, that is stored or parked in a lawful manner on private property in connection with the business of a licensed vehicle dealer or junkyard, or that is an antique or special interest vehicle stored by a motor vehicle collector or the collector's property, if the vehicle or part and the outdoor storage area, if any, are maintained in an orderly manner B, not a health hazard, and C, screened from ordinary public view by appropriate means, including a fence, trees, or shrubbery. And then page 5, line 21, we recommend a change to that to include A, an owner may claim his junk vehicle at any time within the 48 hours of notice being placed upon the vehicle or within a 5-day timeline to respond to said notice. B, the Environmental Protection Agency Board of Directors or official designated by the board shall conduct a hearing if requested by a person for whom notice is required. The hearing shall be held not earlier than the 6th day after the date of the service of notice. At the hearing, the junk vehicle is presumed, unless demonstrated otherwise by the owner, to be inoperable. And D, if the information is available at the location of the nuisance, a resolution or order requiring the removal of the nuisance must include 1, for a motor vehicle, the vehicle's description, vehicle identification number, and license plate. Additionally, we don't think a litter citation should be automatically warrant a vehicle owner to relinquish his or her personal property. This authority could be abused and must be subject to illegal seizure of personal property. Page 7, line 4, we recommend that we strike this section. If the violator is already paying a penalty or fine, it would seem that this is an additional fine on top of the litter citation. Also, the argument could be made that the RRF is already paying for the collection and disposal of this vehicle. We do recommend an additional section, so it'll be section 5160X, we'll say X. Authority is to take abandoned motor vehicles into custody. A law enforcement agency, Mayor's Council of Guam, Department of Public Works, or its representatives may take into custody an abandoned or junk motor vehicle found on public or private property. 1, the law enforcement agency, Mayor's Council of Guam, or its representatives is authorized the immediate removal of a vehicle left on public property that is an obstruction to traffic or cause an immediate danger to human health or property. A law enforcement agency may use personnel, equipment, and facilities to contract for other personnel, equipment, and facilities to remove, preserve, store, send notice regarding, and dispose of abandoned or junk motor vehicles taken into custody by the agency under this subchapter. We also recommend another section, auction or use of abandoned or junk vehicle waiver of rights. If an abandoned or junk motor vehicle is not claimed within the given notice timeframe, the owner or lien holder, A, waives all rights and interests in the vehicle, and B, consents to the sale of the motor vehicle by public auction, the transfer of the motor vehicle to the government of Guam for use for government purpose or disposal. And then one more, we recommend another section, which is disposal of abandoned vehicle in storage facility. A law enforcement agency, Mayor's Council of Guam, Department of Public Works, or its representatives shall take into custody an abandoned vehicle left in a storage facility that has not been claimed in the period provided by the notice. In this section, a law enforcement agency, Mayor's Council of Guam, Department of Public Works, or its representatives has custody if the agency, 1, if the owner has not claimed the vehicle within the given notice timeframe, 2, has physical custody of the vehicle, 3, has given notice to the storage facility that the agency intends to dispose of the vehicle under this section, and B, a compensation for expenses incurred in taking the vehicle into custody and selling it. The Guam Environmental Protection Agency shall retain all the proceeds, which will then be deposited back into the Zero Waste Fund. Dunkalu Nasidus Maasi for allowing me to provide this testimony.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you for all that work. I appreciate it to get that feedback. I think it's critical that we are ensuring that we are not, I see the work that you've done to ensure that we're not, forfeiture, pertaining to forfeiture, and we're protecting the governments, that we're not opening up ourselves to liability. So I understand all that work. To be honest, I haven't had a chance to look through all of this, so I need some time to maybe have it sink in, and we'll probably ask questions in a little bit regarding this. But I just want to maybe allow other people to testify, so Zuzmasi. Next on our list is Attorney General Douglas Moylan. Thank you for being here, sir.
For having me here today. For Bill 104-37, the AG's office has some concerns that I'd like to share with the legislature today. About 16, 17 years ago, when I served as the first elected Attorney General, this was a problem then. Obviously, it's continued and it's getting worse on our island. We were able to attack it and have solutions to stopping the abandoned vehicles problem on Guam. The current scheme of legislation that has developed to this date, in my opinion, is interfering with the ability of the Attorney General's office to use at least 3 different criminal statutes in order to stop people from abandoning their vehicles. Now, before I get into those provisions, I just wanted to mention, and we were at a meeting with the acting governor last week, I believe it was last week, and we were discussing this issue because the administration is having to deal with it with the Mayor's Council and the Attorney General's office and all the other people, including GIPA, on addressing this issue. Guam's problem right now is we don't have a facility and a method to take the vehicles that we purchased every year and dispose of them. Just like with the solid waste problem on trash collection, if you make things expensive enough, people are going to find ways to get around it, especially those people that can't afford to dispose of them. And they're going to continue dumping vehicles on the side of the roads, and when the mayors come and clean them up with all these federal funds or local funds, you're going to get the vehicles being dumped again in that spot, like the white goods are. You know, we've got I believe we have a pretty good program on white goods. The issue, in our discussions with the administration, there's literally only one facility on Guam that handles abandoned vehicles, and it's the Global Recycling Company, I believe. They go from taking out the fluids to stripping the cars down, and then at certain times of the year, they have that metal sold off to whichever vendor off island is coming the way to take the metal. But the service of taking the fluids, the hazardous fluids out, and taking all the parts off of these chassis so they can get to the bare metal that the recycler would want them, is being handled, but it's almost like a backyard type of operation. They're using government property. They're storing, this is according to the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, they're storing the vehicles that we're picking up right now on government property. I am most concerned, and I have my deputy Heather Zona here, because for decades we've been dealing with Guam's inability to manage our waste product, especially the chemical waste that GIPA very eloquently has been talking about. And in the administration, we were talking about putting out an RFP in order to find out who in our area takes these vehicles, these scrap metal. 16 years ago, there were companies that actually came into Guam and wanted the metal, you know, as their ships were passing by and so forth. The government of Guam needs to do a better job about knowing what we're going to do with these vehicles. Whether you want to punish the individual or not, if they don't have, and the government doesn't have a facility that can reasonably take in these vehicles, strip them down and get them off of Guam, we're just putting the pressure on people in our community that have no either knowledge or means to dispose of these vehicles. Right now, the administration, I believe, is looking at $400 a vehicle that Global Recycling will charge a person that attempts to drop their vehicle off at that facility. The mayors are seeing $200 more, so they're looking at $600, at least $600, to take an abandoned vehicle or vehicle that somebody's discarding and have it properly disposed of. That, first of all, it's a cost that every individual is going to have to face at some point on their vehicles, but Guam does not have that ability right now, because even Global Recycling, from what I'm being told, doesn't have a clear way to get these vehicles off Guam, and they have a limited capacity. So the mayor's recent effort on picking up these abandoned vehicles and taking them, and the government actually taking custody of these vehicles, there's no outlet to it. So we're building up, we're looking at storage facilities on our limited government properties to put these cars. The problem is nobody's stripping out the transmission fluid, the engine oil, the radiator fluid, and whatever else, brake fluids out of these cars. So we're taking on a potential multi-million-dollar lawsuit by taking these vehicles and storing them on government property. That's the bigger picture. We've dealt with the ORDOT landfill and all these other environmental nightmares these past decades, ever since I was the Attorney General decades ago. So that's just one aspect of what we're facing on this problem. The second aspect is you're giving due process rights to what is clearly, you ask any police officer, common knowledge out there. I think most people understand what an abandoned car is. When their wheels are off, when the windshield's cracked, when the VIN numbers are being tried to be ripped off, or the license plate's gone. These are the type of cars that we're dealing with. We're not dealing with people that have a breakdown on the side of the road, because those people know if you leave your car more than 24 hours on Guam, it's going to get stripped. When I was the Attorney General, again, before, I literally took a government vehicle as I was driving home and went up to a guy that was stripping out a car in broad daylight. And I just asked him, is that your vehicle? And he just said no, put his tools away, and left. So, giving due process rights to owners of these cars on the side of the road, in my opinion, is not a good approach towards the problem. Under Guam law, we have the public nuisance statute. It's in 10 GCA 2107. The Director of Public Works has the ability to identify a nuisance, and the statute is very clear and very short, and the government has the ability to remove that nuisance, especially when we're talking about government property. And it makes it a misdemeanor. The best way to get the attention of these owners of vehicles is to charge them with a crime. And that crime would be publicly noticed that the Attorney General's office is now charging and prosecuting people for public nuisance when you dump your trash, including car vehicles, on the side of the road. Those are one of the easiest ways to track the owners, whether it's through the VIN, the license plate, the chassis number, the engine serial number. Most of this information is traceable either with rev and tax or even the car dealers themselves. So so that in that respect, I'm concerned by even the inaction of what the committee is attempting to amend the current statute, the statutory scheme. At the minimum, there has to be a proviso in there that the Attorney General and the government of Guam can take other steps available to the government of Guam. By creating the statutory scheme, you're creating an administrative nightmare that's going to require attorneys, staff from these government agencies to be doing all these functions, giving notices to the public of what is clearly an abandoned vehicle. If anything, we should just have a requirement that anyone who, for whatever reason, has a car that cannot be operated or on the side of the road, notifies the Guam Police Department and the mayor, and then they would have certain rights to that car so that the government doesn't pick it up as an abandoned vehicle. It turns the whole analysis around because we're giving too many rights to what is clearly a problem on Guam, period. These people do not want those cars to be, they don't want those cars back, they want to get rid of them. Again, the other statutory requirements in the law is obstructing public roadways, which is a misdemeanor. Again, let the Attorney General do his job, her job, with the government officials and use these statutes that are on the books already. The Chief of Police at our meeting, he brought up, I believe it was the Chief of Police, if not one of the other department heads, the unregistered vehicle. This is what you're seeing on the side of the road, and I believe Daphne from Rev and Tax is going to show. These cars on the side of the road, they've taken their license plates off of it because they know they don't want to be responsible for that abandoned vehicle. Well, there's a crime of an unregistered vehicle, and I'm talking about the category of cars that are on public roadways, on the side of the road, easements, and so forth. Well, that's a Title 16 violation, but it's not strong enough. The senators respectfully should consider increasing the penalty and even making a proviso in these unregistered vehicles that if that car is found on the side of the road or on government property abandoned, and you can spell out what abandoned is. I think some comments from Gipa was just mentioned, good indicators of abandoned vehicle, cracked windshield. You don't need to give so much due process. And the judges, when you bring a public nuisance, they look at the facts and they go, well, clearly the wheels were stripped off this thing, or there's no windows on it and so forth. So making a due process administrative nightmare for the government officials is going to prohibit the ability of the government to move forward with bureaucracy. Also, I like that idea about anyone who destroys their VIN numbers. If in these cars you find that the VIN number has been obliterated, that a special crime be associated with that. Because if we find as a government that someone attempted to obliterate the VIN number, you could still probably track out who owned that vehicle through one of the other identifying information on it. And that is an additional incentive for people not to dump their vehicles on government property. Now, on the private sector, the recommendation is DPW has to do a better job of enforcing the zoning code. There's zoning laws that prevent people from putting all their cars on their properties and so forth. But there's a process there. I'm most concerned, though, about the dumping of the vehicles on government properties. The recommendations that our office is going from, for instance, the homeless encampment that we had to deal with recently. There were, I believe, 4 vehicles that were there, and Director Arreola was very responsive with the Lieutenant Governor in bringing in his equipment, as well as the mayors on lifting those vehicles out of there. They're being used as homeless shelters. Obviously, if you want to clean up the homeless encampments, you have to remove the debris that's there, these vehicles. But 4 vehicles had to be paid for by taxpayer expense in order to get rid of them. And I dovetail back into when the government takes possession of these cars, we arguably become liable for the fluids coming out of it. So in our meeting with the Lieutenant Governor, the Acting Governor, the government needs to have certifications of persons at Global Recycling and even in our own government, whether by bid or RFP or whatever, to be able to strip that car of all its fluids so that GIPA is satisfied that when the government takes it, these cars are now just pieces of metal and wiring and so forth. With all those fluids that are in those vehicles, you put it at a site, they're going to eventually start leaking, and then EPA is going to, US EPA, could even come in here and hit us with the $1 million fines that they've done in the past. So the recommendations that our office is recommending is please do not tie the hands of the Attorney General's office in any legislation that's passed, even if the committee decides to go down these due process rights, to have a clear exception that the Attorney General, on behalf of the government or the government of Guam, has the right to pursue alternative ways of dealing with the abandoned cars issue. And then, for instance, that public nuisance, obstructing public roadways, and using the unregistered vehicle statutes to prosecute and remove those vehicles quickly. Unfortunately, in this second term as Attorney General, I find that using the criminal statutes as more effective towards achieving an important public interest and government goal. When you use the civil remedies, you're asking for years of litigation and appeals. It transcends even government officials with the amount of litigation that can be generated from this. When you use the criminal statutes, it's a clear right of the people of Guam to go in and fix what is really a criminal matter. If you think about the persons who abandon their vehicles, they're not the individuals who care about environmental concerns. They're not the people that care about making sure their cars are properly registered at Rev and Tax. They're there to dump their trash and not have to pay anything for it. So they should be prosecuted criminally before our juries and then punished accordingly, which sends the deterrence to everybody else out there. And that was what, and I would respectfully defer to Mayor, the Sinahanya Mayor? Robert, right. He had indicated at our Mayor's Council meeting that the last time, from his perspective, that he saw anything being done is the efforts that our Attorney General's office was doing, and we weren't doing it civilly. We were going out criminally, and we gave the amnesty. A warning first, you've got 60 days to move your cars, otherwise the government was going to go in and start identifying these properties and having you prosecuted and taken before the court system. Another important piece of the whole picture here, The senators, I respectfully submit, need to look at the registration, the ownership that Revenue Tax has, the documents that they have and the requirements that they have. When you own a vehicle, such as when you purchase a vehicle new or even used for that matter, and get your registration, what's happening is people are always saying, oh, I sold that vehicle, and they think they're going to get away with it. Well, that's going to cause the judge to have to decide yes or no, you sold it and this and that. There needs to be a legislative statement that, especially for abandoned vehicles, that if at the Department of Revenue and Taxation, that they have no record that you ever formally transferred title of that car from yourself to the next individual, you shall be responsible for that vehicle, both criminally and civilly. So make it a crime to not transfer that vehicle on the sale. That will be an incentive for people to not only make sure that their registration is transferred, because that causes a whole new set of problems when people don't have registered vehicles, and our code already talks to it in terms of liability. I think it's $2,000. If that car you sold gets into an accident, I believe the person who's injured can actually sue the current registered owner at Revenue Tax for a certain amount of money. The liability continues until you transfer title. In this case, you clearly want to have a transfer of title from the last owner to the current owner, or if that vehicle ends up having to be picked up on the side of the road and disposed of by the people of Guam, that you will be responsible by law because you didn't transfer your vehicle properly. So that's another, as you guys, senators, look at the addressing the abandoned vehicle problem, I would respectfully submit needs to be addressed. And these petty misdemeanor statutes be increased to misdemeanor. The petty misdemeanor does not carry with it any real teeth compared to a misdemeanor where there's up to a year in jail. So I think that would be important. So at that, Madam Chairwoman, I would like to submit that we're concerned about this. I believe that there's a lot, the whole administration and the AG's office, as well as the senators here, we have a problem with the abandoned vehicles. But the bigger problem is what do we do with these cars and how are we going to address it? At the lieutenant governor's meeting that we had, we suggested that they put out an RFP internationally for people in our area of the world that may have an interest in the metal that Guam is generating. Look to Hawaii, how they deal with getting these vehicles out of their community. You know, the islands, we have a special problem. Look to Saipan, and maybe even join with Saipan so that when they bring the ship to our area of the world, they can just load it, and probably Asia has a lot of facilities that might still be wanting the steel and the metal. But unless we beef up places like Global Recycling or Lujan's salvage yard, which are basically the repositories for these vehicles, creating the pressure in the system that's all it's going to do right now. You know, the people that we're looking at that are abandoning these vehicles probably are, the most part, don't have the money to pay $600 to get rid of their vehicles. So we can threaten them, we can punish them, we can sanction them, but unless Guam really has a way to get these vehicles out of here, you know, we're fighting the wind, so to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Attorney General Moylan, for those very interesting insights and you know, solutions. I think we're looking for solutions. All right, so I would like to recognize the next person on our list is Director Borja from the Department of Land Management. Sus Masi for being here.
The fact to follow. We agree with EPA's request or need for the classification of these vehicles, abandoned vehicles, junk vehicles, generally unwanted vehicles, because the necessary component for this project to succeed is land, as the Attorney General mentioned. And abandoned vehicles are basically stored for 10 days before they can be disposed of. That would require a zoning of P for parking. Junk vehicles, which is probably the processing and dismantling of these vehicles, more likely align with zoning for a junkyard, which is M2 zoning. And there is no zoning specifically for auto recycling facilities, but we find that it best aligns to the definition of a junkyard in the zoning law. Junkyard is an open area where waste, scrap metal, paper, rags, or similar materials are bought, sold, exchanged, stored, baled, packed, disassembled, or handled, including the dismantling or storing of wrecked automobiles or other vehicles and buildings. The terms dismantling or storing do not include the action of a licensed automobile repairer or garage owner in stripping an automobile or other vehicle of its usable parts, as long as such action is accomplished within 10 days of the arrival of the motor vehicle
Sorry,
being
excuse
so
me.
stripped.
Sorry, excuse me, Director, do we have a copy of your testimony?
No, you don't. I'll
Okay.
definitely give you one.
Okay, thank you.
10 days of the arrival of the motor vehicle being so stripped on the premises of the garage or to the automobile repair businesses. Junkyards are permitted in M2 zones under these special provisions. Sub-Article 6, Article 5 of the zoning law, which discusses permits required, improvement standards, required application to the Guam Land Use Commission, required hearings, determination to issue or deny a permit, and how to address non-conforming junkyards. The Attorney General is also correct in the two facilities that he cited as probably the facilities that are the premier facilities for these acceptance, dismantling, and processing of junk vehicles, junkyards. However, the global recycling operation is operating on Chamorro Land Trust property, I believe without a lease or a license, and the Lujan operation is really not operating legally at all. They received a variance for the junkyard, which has since expired. It was approved in 1980 by the TPC for a 5-year term. They have made inquiries to land management about reviving their operation, but so far no application has been submitted rather. So, and our review of government lands available for issues like this are either with the Chamorro Land Trust Commission or the Guam Ancestral Lands Commission. But any action with these properties can only be done by the legislature. The executive branch, the administration cannot really touch these properties, especially the ones under Chamorro Land Trust jurisdiction. So they would have to be, action would have to be taken by the legislature on that. I do suggest that if the legislature is going to take action to designate properties for this type of operations, that in the legislation they designate use, which is kind of zoning that property for that particular activity. On the issue of private property where junk vehicles may be located, there is probably an obligation or a requirement by the mortgage holder if that property is still under a mortgage. The banks and the financial institutions probably have an obligation to contact that people and say, hey, you know, we've got a mortgage on your property and you're degrading it by having all those junk vehicles around it. But, you know, that's a private matter there. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Director Borja, we'll move on to the next one. On our list, we have Director Arreola, Department of Public Works. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning to all the senators. I don't have written testimony, but I'll summarize and submit the written testimony to the committee later. As I was listening to A.G. Moylan, his entire presentation was basically what I had to say, so I'll just focus on some of the issues that he said. And I think to repeat as what I said in the roundtable hearing, you know, it's not just a matter of the government addressing the pickup, the collection, the storage, and the shipping off of abandoned vehicles. It's a mindset that we're dealing with of why are our residents, our people, keeping junk vehicles, disposing of junk vehicles wherever they want. You know, I did all the yesterday afternoon. I did site visits to look at the streets, village streets that we're ready to pave. And granted, these streets are really in bad condition, and we're ready to pave it. But throughout the streets, and these are in Dedido, they're in Barragata, there's just junk vehicles all over, and it's on government easements and it's on private property. It's on both. And so, you know, when I read this bill, and I read the statute that guides Public Works, the Mayor's Council, EPA on the collection of, you know, it's very administrative in nature. There's a lot of processes that we have to go through before we, and I'm wondering, I'm sitting here and I'm like, I don't know why we have to go through all this due process. We're dealing with people who don't care. We're dealing with people who don't, who are callous, who are dealing with people who are just naturally filthy. And so why should we care about what they do? And if they leave something, let's just pick it up and take it. And as the AG said, let's go after them and file criminal charges against them. I think we all have homes here. We all have apartments or condominiums, or we have our own residences. If someone came to my house and just parked a junk vehicle and then just drove away, I can tell you right now what's going to happen to that vehicle. I'm going to call a tow truck, or I'll pull it, or I'll get rid of it like that. I'm not going to, I'll go later on probably and find out who the owner is. But I think I would venture to say 99% of the vehicles that are out there they don't care. They're not going to come back for it. It's burned. It's junk. There's absolutely no use for it, and so there's no care at all on what happens to that vehicle. Number two, we keep talking about it. We need a storage area, a garage, a staging area for these vehicles until such time as the global market, if you will, is ready to buy scrap metal. You know, I don't know the global market. All I know is that I've offered the back side of the DPW compound. If we were to go out on a weekend and collect junk vehicles, we'll probably fill it in 3 days. Yeah, that's just the way of the world of what's happening out there. So a storage area is really critical for us. You know, we could stage it until, like I said, such time as the recycler is ready to accept it. And then the other issue is, I think there's a gap in the bill and even in the law. When individuals get rid of their junk car or they sell a car, mostly if it's junk and or abandoned, right? They'll sign over the title, or some things they just won't. They'll just let the title lapse, and all of a sudden the vehicle lands in someone else's hands. You can't. Again, 99%, I believe, of the vehicles out there, if we were to trace the VIN, the chassis number or engine number, and go to RevTax and see who the last owner was, that's probably going to be 5 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, and they've abandoned that a long, long time ago. So, you know, there's going to be issues there. And then lastly, I think there's a two-pronged approach to the collection of abandoned vehicles and junk vehicles. I think certainly this bill and other pieces of legislation, we can do this moving forward, right? But I can tell you right now, there's a huge number of junk and abandoned vehicles out there, similar to how we have the island-wide coastal cleanup or island-wide beach cleanup, the island-wide road cleanup, or I think the last time we had the Pope visit Guam, or President Clinton visited Guam, we did a major island-wide cleanup. That's kind of what we have to do with this junk and abandoned vehicle thing. It's at the point where I can't give a number of what's out there. All I know is that every village has junk vehicles, and it's like, it's growing faster than the jungle out there. It's a, I don't know, maybe for lack of a better word, it's almost like an epidemic. Everywhere you go, there's junk vehicles, and you know, we don't have a place to put it. We don't have a place to ship it. So that's a real concern, especially for DPW, as for some reason we are tasked with taking care and getting rid of these junk vehicles, for the most part, on government easements. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll submit written testimony to the committee. Thank you.
Mr. Dueñas, Director Arriola, thank you for your testimony. I'd like to recognize Executive Director of the Mayor's Council, Angel Sablan, if you'd like to provide testimony.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Senators. I'm Angel Sablan, the Executive Director of the Mayor's Council of Guam. The Mayor's Council of Guam desires to be an effective multi-agency partner in our desire to be good stewards of our land and environment. Our inclusion in government beautification projects is inherent to our roles as leaders in our communities. We appreciate policy that streamlines bureaucratic processes and yields results. We support Bill 10437 relative to disposal of junk vehicles. We are at a disadvantage in disposing junk vehicles on public property. We have authority to remove a junk vehicle, but current statute does not allow us to dispose of it. This bill allows us to spend the appropriated funds quickly and effectively. Please consider the following points. 1, is it appropriate in this same legislation to amend the transfer of vehicle ownership procedure to ensure the previous owner properly effectuates this change to the new owner? Many of us find that owners claim to have transferred the property while the new owner never completes the formal process of the motor vehicle division. 2, Section 6, line 13, in quotes, of 10 pounds or more. We consider any amount of trash dumped upon any highway, street, alley or road, etc., to be littering and unlawful. Number 3, Section 7, lines 22 and 23. Some of our members would prefer to see more stringent fines starting at $1,000 for the first offense. They believe a harsher deterrent is necessary to change the current littering mindset. Number 4, Section 7, line 4. The mayor's offices welcome the detailed offenders to their offices to comply with this section. Our villages can use the extra hands to pick up trash or to conduct anti-littering and recycling outreach and/or activities. Number 5, Section 8. Tampering with vehicle identification numbers or vehicle identifiers is essentially stealing a vehicle and should be considered grand theft auto, committing a felony. Number 6, can we ensure this bill releases the government from any liability once a vehicle is deemed to be junk or disposed? Thank you for moving forward with this legislation to make our jobs easier to dispose of junk vehicles. Ultimately, we all want a beautiful and clean island. Sincerely, signed by 15 of our 19 mayors and 07 of our vice mayors. And as the executive director of the council, I'd just like to add a few more points that deals with my office. Section 51606, under this proposed legislation, talks about reimbursement to the Recycling Revolving Fund for transport costs and disposal costs. This is fine. However, what if the funds used is from the MCOG Operations Fund? Shouldn't funds used from the MCOG funds, aside from the RRF, be reimbursed to the MCOG? The big question not answered in this bill is, where do these vehicles go if scrap dealers, towing companies, or even recycling centers refuse to accept these vehicles? The need for either GEPA or GSWA to establish an impound lot or contract existing junkyards to accept these vehicles is key to making this bill work. There are two sections 51606. One is litter violations and the other one that I just mentioned, so maybe some editing is necessary here. Title 5, Chapter 40 statute already has a section for municipal fund. This proposed section says that any funds collected, the $100 for the mayor's council, goes to the municipal fund. Although statute has an established municipal fund, it has never been funded or appropriations made to it. So I suggest that instead of municipal fund, that these funds be reimbursed or deposited into the village's non-appropriated funds, which every village has already established. So I just mentioned this for clarity. Thank you, Madam Chair and Senators.
Suduz Masi, Executive Director Sablan, and I would just want to thank the mayors for their support and for working very quickly to get this letter. So thank you to all the mayors as well. So next, I would like to recognize Director Shimizu. Thank you for being here.
Hafide, and thank you so much, Senator Perez. Hafide, Senator Perez, Speaker Terlahi, members of the committee, and of course, honorable senators of the 37th Guam Legislature. My name is Daphne Shimizu, and I'm the Director of the Guam Department of Revenue and Taxation. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on Bill 104-37 LS. As has been communicated by the various stakeholders, there are challenges with the current abandoned vehicle statute, which is found in 16 GCA Chapter 3, Section 3606, to include requirements for storage, costly and cumbersome notice requirements, and lack of sufficient fines. The current statute requires any peace officer or employee authorized in writing by the Director of DPW who finds a vehicle has been parked for more than 24 hours during weekdays or for more than 48 hours during weekends to remove the vehicle and store it in a police parking area, a garage, or a licensed public garage. It requires DRT to send notice by certified mail to the legal owner within 5 days after removal of the vehicle, and that the owner be given 10 days after the mailing to reclaim his or her vehicle. It also requires DRT to appraise vehicles if they're not reclaimed, and to sell without auction vehicles appraised at less than $100, and to sell at public auction vehicles appraised at over $100. The current law also allows the imposition of a $100 fine for every 30-day period that an owner fails to dispose of the vehicle. Bill 104-37 is a good start to addressing the various issues with the current law which have been identified. However, the bill does not address the current abandoned vehicle statute. DRT recommends that Title 16, Chapter 3, Section 3606 be repealed, and that Title 10, Chapter 51 be updated as proposed by Bill 104-37, but that it addresses both the abandoned and junk vehicle issue. This will reduce potential ambiguity in the law, as there will be a single place in the law which addresses abandoned and junk vehicles, and will also allow for improvements and updates to strengthen the law. It is important to note that there are abandoned vehicles which are never registered with the Guam Department of Revenue and Taxation. And in addition to this, in cases where a vehicle is sold or given away and title for such vehicle is not transferred to the new owner, the responsibility for the vehicle still lies with the original owner, who may not even be aware that title has not been transferred. The following are DRT's specific comments regarding Bill 104-37. As already indicated by EPA, the bill proposes to change the current law to allocate funds from the Abandoned Vehicle and Streetlight Fund to the Recycling Revolving Fund. However, the RRF is now the Zero Waste Fund. Also, Section 4, Section 51603P, page 3, lines 3 through 16, defines junk vehicle and indicates that junk vehicles have no value. However, there are instances that an abandoned vehicle does have value, and therefore we recommend removing the language "and has no value except as a source of parts or scrap." Section 51603C, page 5, lines 19 to 20, requires that notices be recorded at the Motor Vehicle Division. However, we recommend that notice only be provided to DRT's Motor Vehicle Division when a vehicle is not claimed. This will reduce the amount of paperwork involved in the event a vehicle is claimed by its owner. In addition to this, we would like to clarify that the intent of the notice is for DRT to update ownership to reflect that the government has taken ownership of the vehicle. Section 51604B, page 5, lines 24 to 25, and page 6, lines 1 to 4, indicate that persons claiming the junk vehicles will be responsible for paying the costs associated pursuant to Guam law, and that claims be filed at Guam DRT. DRT recommends that there be a fee schedule created or referenced as opposed to utilizing cost, as costs fluctuate. Also, because these claims must be made within 48 hours as indicated in section 51602, they should be filed with the agency which disposed of the vehicle, as only information for unclaimed vehicles should be provided to DRT's Motor Vehicle Division. Section 51606, page 6, lines 19 to 20, requires littering violation citations to be sent by certified mail. It isn't clear from the read, from kind of the cursory read, to which agency is to mail such citation. However, DRT recommends removing the certified mail requirement, as this is something that we have also discussed with regards to the current abandoned vehicle statute, which is cumbersome and costly and which may not be necessary. And these are the comments that we have, and I'm here to answer any questions you have regarding our testimony. Sujus Masi.
Thank you so much, Director Shimizu. Are there anyone else who would like to testify on Bill 104-37? All right. Okay, thank you. I'd like to recognize Ms. Monica Flores for her testimony. Good morning.
Good morning, Senator, and to all the senators, thank you again. I'm here to testify in support of this bill. But before I continue, I just want to say that other than an issue of beautification, an issue of criminal law, and an issue of environmental protection, this is also a social justice issue and an issue about poverty. I don't know if anybody in this room has ever needed to take care of a junk vehicle that was in their possession or in their family property, but a lot of people simply call a towing company and pay $300 for that vehicle to be removed from their private property. That's just people doing what they think is responsible, and people who happen to have $300 to do that. I don't think that the laws on the books have done much to curb this issue, and so to suggest that harsher penalties are the way, and to criminalize, basically our marginalized communities further is a real solution. I also want to call out concern that it's a mindset issue because, some of these people, their cars are being stolen and abandoned. It's not necessarily the mindset of anybody. Again, this is a social justice issue and a poverty issue as well. I'm in support of this bill, and like many people, I've grown up in Guam. I've lived here for 45 years. I'm born and raised, and this is a problem that has been here, but continues to just get worse and worse as the years go on. And I really want to thank the authors of this bill for including specifically the definition of depollution and all of its components. I also noticed that Guam EPA included a suggestion for including tires, and I was going to make that same suggestion, even though most of the vehicles that are abandoned or are left junk don't have any tires on them, but just to include tires just in case. I also wanted to encourage the body to look at what's happening at the junkyards, because while junk cars being abandoned on the side of the road are an issue, there are folks who think that the solution is to go to the junkyards, and they pile up there as well. And so, looking at the issue of depollution and proper disposal in the junkyards is something that also might need to be addressed. The issue of a VIN number being scratched off and that being a misdemeanor makes sense if we know who did it. But if somebody stole a vehicle, scratched the VIN number off, and abandoned it, then prosecuting the original owner of that vehicle is problematic. I support this bill because, first of all, going back to the point of depollution, all the hazardous chemicals that remain in abandoned vehicles, gasoline, diesel fuel, oil, coolant, brake fluid, transmission fluid, air conditioning, refrigerants, gear oil, windshield, washer fluids, all of these chemicals pose a hazard to our soil, our aquifer, and actively defoliate grass and various plants. And so with that, I'm here to support this bill, and also just wanted to make another point that stolen plates don't missing license plates don't necessarily mean that people don't want to get caught abandoning their vehicles. There's also that issue of people stealing license plates and using them on vehicles that are not registered. And so these are just a few points I wanted to make. Thank you. I thank the authors for introducing this bill, and thank everybody who testified today. Sizos Masi.
Thank you so much, Ms. Flores. Is there anyone else who would like to testify? Okay, well, thank you so much for being here, and I'll just get right to the point. So the bill really is an attempt to distinguish junk vehicle from abandoned vehicle, and therefore provide more streamlined procedures to remove it expeditiously from, public property, roadsides, which we haven't been able to do thus far, quite efficiently. And so I guess the question for, EPA, are you opposed to this definition of basically distinguishing junk vehicle from an abandoned vehicle?
I think we don't necessarily oppose the bill, but we oppose the bill in its current form. We did make the suggestion that if we could maybe incorporate junk vehicles into the abandoned vehicle section, because ultimately abandoned vehicles, at least in our line of work, abandoned vehicles almost like Director Ariola mentioned, 99% of abandoned vehicles are junk vehicles. So I think maybe strengthening the language under the abandoned vehicles to include junk vehicles may be a better solution, as opposed to creating the two different categories, abandoned vehicles and junk vehicles, and then having two separate due processes for those categories may complicate things. Because if it's a abandoned vehicle, or let's say a vehicle on the side of the road, we then have to determine, is it an abandoned vehicle or can we consider it a junk vehicle? Abandoned vehicle has its own due process. Under this new article, it says that we can issue a litter citation, and then that automatically warrants the forfeiture of that vehicle after 48 hours. So I think that there needs to be a cohesive, segue into an abandoned vehicle becoming a junk vehicle. But I think they shouldn't be separate.
Yeah, I mean, the point was to treat it as litter, right? If this is a junk vehicle, the cost of removing it is more than the value of the junk itself. So that was the purpose of this bill, is to separate those two so we can then remove them quicker.
Right. But then if it were, I guess for us, we would just consider it a junk vehicle and not label it as an abandoned vehicle for a smoother process. But there's still that, that existing abandoned vehicle due process. So it, again, creates that complication between identifying it as an abandoned vehicle or a junk vehicle.
Yeah, because, we hear from experience, I think at our roundtable was discussed that abandoned vehicles are the ones that they leave at the airport parking lot, right? And it's, it's protected, nobody comes and, takes it apart. Or at least there's less of that, or they leave it on, the military base, right? So they want to keep their car up until the point where they leave. And so that is still, it's a functioning vehicle versus a vehicle that has been stripped off parts. It can't run, on the roads, and the longer it stays, the less of the chances of it operating. So this was the point of I guess we could discuss this further, if you, can, I'm hoping that this can be something, because we can't address, abandoned and junk vehicles using the same methods that we have currently. We have to come up with new ways of dealing with it if we want to really put a dent into this problem, which is a growing problem. And, considering, again, during the roundtable, we discussed that, we're purchasing, importing more and more cars, but the amount that's leaving Guam is not keeping up with the amount that we're bringing in. And so I guess that goes to the other point, right, is the, another issue was the impound lot. So maybe this question is for Director Borja. So you mentioned, I know that during the roundtable was discussed that there was a search for property. And if I heard correctly, were you looking, did you identify Chamorro Land Trust properties? And were there other government properties in industrial zones that could qualify, that doesn't require law change?
Not to my knowledge. There's only one lot in Dedido that's identified as a parking zone, and that's the old flea market there, right on the corner there. That's identified. So searching the GLUC records for those type of properties that privately may have been applied for N2 zone, junkyard or parking, we only found two. One is the Dedido one, and another lot in Malesso, but that one has never been effectuated. It was additional parking for the Cocos Island Resort. Those were the only two lots that we saw an effort made for parking designation. And as EPA says, there is a difference in the zoning requirements for an abandoned vehicle that you kind of store for a while, and then differently for junk vehicles, for junkyards. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that really kind of supports the goal of this bill, is that we need to separate those two categories and then treat them differently. I also want to go back to Director Shimizu's point about repealing the section and just kind of consolidating it within, Guam EPA's section. Would you support that, Deputy, or would EPA support that amendment?
I think we would, provided that there's still that coordination with DRT to identify registered owners, or the last registered owner. But we are not in the business to evaluate the value of the vehicles either. So that's something that the law may have to address.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I really appreciate everybody's testimony. It's really a diverse, input. And so we have on one end, strengthen due process. On the other end, let's make it a criminal offense and maybe, figure out a way where it's not so administratively burdensome. So I do appreciate those comments, and I appreciate the diversity of comments. And this is something we're definitely going to have to bring back, and when we redraft or amend the bill, this is something that we're going to go back and look into this a little bit more. But I also want to just point out, so this is something the Mayor's Council brought up in their testimony in regards to tampering, right? So currently in the bill, it identifies tampering of the VIN number, or it would consider the tampering of the VIN number as a misdemeanor. But in their testimony, they recommended it to be a felony. And I was just notified by one of my colleagues here that it is a felony in another part of law. So I guess the question that I had about that is, does mens rea apply to this? Would that be considered too harsh, considering the type of crime? This would be for the Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'm going to have my Chief Prosecutor address that, Heather Zona, who's also here right now.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chief Prosecutor, for being here.
Thank you, and good morning, Senator. So mens rea would apply because we need to know who is actually engaged in that activity. But it would apply, and I don't know that it would be a harsh result. Clearly, we need to know identifying information on these vehicles, and that goes beyond simply looking at whether a car is stolen. We're looking at just administrative things. certainly Guam has an interest in being able to track vehicles and understand, is this vehicle compliant with appropriate environmental regulations? Was this vehicle stolen from another jurisdiction? These are all very important aspects to the law, and one of the ways that we track that, in addition to monitoring locally whether a vehicle has been stolen, whether it's been properly registered, is based on the VIN number, as well as the engine block number and other things like that. So I don't know that it is such a harsh penalty to have it be charged as a felony, because there are very important interests that are involved with maintaining identification of vehicles. So.
And then, thank you for that response. So I guess the question I want to follow up with the Attorney General is, so you're proposing a whole new framework as criminal, strengthening the criminal component of law. So how would that work with, what's going on right now? Can they coexist as far as this bill and what you're proposing to strengthen more of the criminal aspect of it?
I think it can give dual remedies to a problem that the legislature wishes to address. That's why I say that there is that catch-all called public nuisance, and the former legislatures clearly identified that if a broad umbrella of what we call public nuisances, it can be essentially anything from noise to smell to junk on the side of the road, that the DPW director has that authority to designate that, and then the Attorney General would have the ability to prosecute that. But because the legislature has acted already with passing a statute talking about some civil relief, it might interfere with the broad category of public nuisance. So what I was proposing, that if the committee was to go forward with passing some form of amendment to the existing statute, that it just has a provision that the government of Guam has the ability to pursue both this remedy as well as all of the remedies available in the law. So I do believe that the bigger problem is to identify what's out there. I think that the majority, 90%, if not more, like the deputy director said, these people do not want to be found. There's a reason why they're getting rid of identification markings, and I think it's almost common sense. And this is what the judges would apply if it was brought to court, that abandoned vehicles, they have certain indicia that the owner does not want. And I kind of digress a bit. If you want to protect those people that are in hard times, their car broke down, they don't have the ability to hire a tow truck or to move their car quickly, then just give them that ability to give notice to the GPD and the mayor. That's my car. I got to get it out of there. Be compassionate. They need some time to get it out of there, as opposed to what I think most of as you, Madam Chairwoman, are trying to address is this problem of junk, nuisance, and that category. So they can exist together, but the legislature should make it very clear it's not tying the hands of DPW, the Attorney General's office, to pursue other remedies available, criminal remedies available. I don't want to be harsh. This is not a social justice idea in my mind. This is just a matter of let's clean up the junk on this island. And it's dangerous, and environmentally, it's going to harm us as these fluids get into the water table. But thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Attorney General. I would like to, I recognize the speaker. She was here earlier. I just didn't publicly recognize her. Okay, so I want to open the floor to my colleagues for questions, I guess in the order. Senator Fisher?
Thank you, ma'am. This is a question for the Attorney General. The notice provision in this law, do you think it meets constitutional muster? Is it the best practicable notice?
Because we're dealing with property, some basic property issues. You're already in that category of a question whether the person wants to claim the property. I think the notice provisions, to me, it's not raising an immediate red flag. You're giving them more than the law already provides. That sort of thing. That's what I was worried about, is that under the public nuisance statute, the unregistered vehicle statute, that the police, the DPW, and the Attorney General's office would all be prevented from taking those avenues, because you now have, whether it's 24, 48, or any type of notice requirement now that the legislature has passed, and this is after the other statutes were passed. So the defense attorney, if they first of all, I don't think you're going to find a defense attorney here for the most part. I think people are just, they don't want to have anything to do with these things that are on the side of the road. But if it was to play out in court, somebody's actually trying to challenge this, I think that our ability, if, for instance, somebody's vehicle was taken by DPW under public nuisance and the Attorney General's office was involved and so forth, they come out and say that, wait, you took my property without following this civil procedure code, therefore we're going to sue the government for having taken our property. That's what I'm worried about. That the court in that first case is going to say, yeah, the senators passed it after the public nuisance. They carved out that exception for it. So AG, DPW, Government of Guam, you shouldn't have taken that and sent it off to the disposal site. That's where I was seeking some clarity. So no, I do not. I think that the notice requirements, they're not shocking me in terms of, you're giving them more than I would want them to be given, but that's up to the legislature.
So in your estimation, you could defend the notice against a challenge?
We're talking about the notices that you put out, the
car.
Police department identifies it, you got 48 hours to move this car.
Right.
In a way, that's why I kind of suggested, if the person who's on bad times has a vehicle on the side of the road, can't move it because it's got to be picked up and towed or whatever, give an alternate ability to give notice, written notice to the GPD, like we do with the panhandlers. You can panhandle if you give notice to the Guam Police Department. It's a record of their administratively. Give a notice to the mayor's council, the mayor of that village. My car is on the side of the road. Please don't touch it. You know, don't let the AG pull it for public nuisance, whatever. I think that is adequate protection for that small group of cars out there that people can't move it so quickly. I don't really see that posting the notice as a problem because we're going to tow it. I think logistically, in 48 hours, with the mayors and mobilizing, it's not going to be moved for 48 hours once you've identified it. We've got cars there for years. So just putting that out there, though, what happens if you don't do it? You're now giving this non-existent person, whoever it is, the right to sue the government for having improperly taken their vehicle. So is the government claims fund now going to be subject to $2,000 claim that the vehicle was taken away and so forth? Will lawyers have to defend that? See, that's why I'm looking at the administrative problems. From Rev and Tax, what Daphne was saying, Director Shimizu was saying to DPW, because I saw that when we were doing the homeless abandonment project of the DPW director, you know, he had to take the vehicles. We were looking for storage sites for these homeless vehicles that were being picked off the sites. So that's where we're coming from, Senator. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then I just have one more question, and this is for Ms. Flores. Ma'am, I was really interested in your comment about how this may unfairly impact marginalized communities. Mm-hmm. Could you expound upon that?
Well, you know, if you're looking at the difference between abandoned and junk vehicles and looking at, you know, the impacts to our community, to our environment and our community, that's one thing. But some of the language that was used today in this hearing very directly implies that that all of this is done with, you know, a blanket of criminal activity and negligence that just is not applicable to every single situation. And increasing, you know, I feel like increasing the criminalization of poor people who cannot properly dispose of their vehicles, or criminalizing people whose vehicles were stolen and then found to become junk vehicles is problematic. And so that definitely was where that comment was coming from.
Okay. Thank you for bringing that important issue to our attention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Dueñas, you're recognized.
Madam Chair. You know, Madam Chair, I'm fond sometimes of saying that it's not rocket science, but I think I found rocket science. But I think everybody's here with good intentions, so I just want to focus in on the two things that seem to be creating a logjam. Attorney General Moellen, I think we're having a question here of statutory construction when what this bill is trying to do is actually call it what it is, a junk car, meaning it's junk. Ever since we've drafted this bill, we've been trying to say, and DPW director has said this, when you have this situation with these abandoned, and they're not abandoned vehicles anymore. After 48 hours, they become junk, because obviously the owner has no intention, or whoever deposited the junk, that's what I'm going to keep calling it now. I'm not going to use abandoned vehicle anymore. The trash on the side of the road, no different than somebody just pulling off to the side of the road, throwing out 10 bags of trash and boogieing down the way. You know, that's what we're saying. It's trash now. And we, as the government of Guam, have an obligation, particularly on rights of way, for both safety purposes and for eyesores and nuisance. I mean, we're doing all this work to try to get visitors to come back to Guam. I hope to God they never go on the back road and try to go hiking, you know, at some of the beautiful sites back there, because you can just drive up there right now. And last week, director said that he counted 14. I counted 24. And that was just at the intersection going down to the Nelson property down. I didn't even come from the gate. Anyways, my point is there conflict in the statutory construction on this, as when the section that's being amended now becomes the law, an abandoned vehicle still has its process, because it could be an abandoned vehicle. After the 48, it becomes junk. So is there a problem with the statutory construction in terms of having to repeal Title 16 as being recommended by others here?
I have to take a closer look at it in order to firmly answer your question. But these are, well, Title 16, I think, was referenced as a criminal statute, if I'm not mistaken. It's a, I don't have that in front of me right now, but
it was basically all the rights given under the, yeah. I mean, Daphne, if you want to jump in, jump in.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. And so just to clarify, you know, there are probably many ways to address the issue of abandoned and junk vehicles. There's probably many pathways. It could be there's two separate laws. It could be there's a single law. But what I wanted to point out is that in Title 16, Chapter 3, Section 3606, there is reference to any vehicles that have a value of less than $100. And so also in this proposed, in the bill, 104-37, and just to go back to what the AG mentioned as well, which is what we're hearing reports of, the cost to dispose of a vehicle for basic storage and towing is about $600 to $650. And so if the definition in the bill 104-37 is for a junk vehicle means a motor vehicle dumped, discarded, or disposed of on public or private property without approval by owners, that is incapable of operating on public streets, roads, and highways, and has no value except as a source of parts or scrap, the abandoned vehicle statute still actually will apply, because there's still mention of a value of $100 or less. And so unless there's some maybe reconciliation between what's being proposed and what is already in the abandoned vehicle statute, there's going to be an issue. Like EPA mentioned, if I look at a vehicle, is it an abandoned vehicle or a junk vehicle? And just to share, there actually are vehicles which are abandoned that have value, and that the tires have not been taken off them, and that can still be driven and used. Sometimes we see that happen when we see certain military, people from the military who may leave and they're not able to sell their vehicle, and so that's actually something that we see as an issue. GPD has brought that up. But again, I'm not saying that this is a bad bill. I actually just wanted to point out that there are certain definitions that maybe need to be addressed if the pathway is to make sure that there's a separate process for if it's an abandoned vehicle that is still in good condition, that is parked at the airport parking lot, that we want to make sure gets to that person versus another vehicle. So again, I just want to point out the reason why I'm suggesting it, and there's many different probably mechanisms for addressing this, but is because the way that the Bill 104-37 is written, there's overlap. And so it's either address the overlap or make it a single statute that has both definitions in it and has a single process perhaps, or where the process is very clear, because this as also Ms. Flores mentioned, there are many different types of situations which would result in a vehicle being abandoned and eventually become junk. But, again, that's why I
Yeah,
brought up that
so-
as an item.
So I think your interpretation, and this is why I go to the Attorney General on statutory construction, your interpretation is because you're reading a conflict. Under statutory construction, normally, the latter prevails in time, which means if we're making a definition now of a junk vehicle, that means the abandoned vehicle still has its statutory rights. Meaning the public now knows, after 48 hours, if you think that that vehicle is anything of value on a right-of-way, on the side of the road, in any other location, you better know that after 48 hours, this statute now prevails. It's now a junk vehicle. I mean, it's now trash, excuse me. It's not an abandoned vehicle anymore. It's discarded refuse. So, I mean, we can go to our legal too when we go back and try to determine this, but I know this has always been a contention because, I mean, if we go by EPA's recommendations, I mean, we're actually going right back to the drawing table, in my opinion, in terms of the bureaucracy. I mean, it's a Bible, basically, that they've given to us in terms of being able to do this if we're going to do it this way. But this is what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid this by saying this is no different than somebody in the back of the truck either stopping or driving down the road and just chucking their garbage to the side. So I don't know that it's going to work, but what I'm trying to say is I think that under statutory construction, when you make a new definition in another chapter, it doesn't necessarily conflict because the latter in time prevails. This is now the law of the land, that if you don't deal with this in 48 hours, be on notice. And I agree with the Attorney General. Let's have some compassion. When the people of Guam know that this is the law of the land, many people will run to their mayor and say, hey, mayor, can I get your email address? I want to send you a former email. EPA, DPW, I want to send you a former email saying, hey, give me 72, give me, a little bit more time because this vehicle has value to me. I'm poor, the rim broke and I'm trying to get my cousin to help me to get a new tire and I'm going to get it out of there. I think there is compassion that's built in, but we'll meet with our legal to deal with this issue, but I still think that this confusion over whether or not we can enact this provision and it's in conflict, I don't think it is. I think this new definition stands if this bill passes into law, and then basically abandoned vehicle provision still has its provision, but then it relinquishes after 48 hours. So we'll get that legal clarification, but I had to put that on the record because if we go through all this other procedure to try to re-bureaucratically fix this, like I said, that's where I found rocket science in terms of, passing a legislation that's trying to do one. I know it sounds simple. I know it's more complicated, and that's why I'm going to go to Joe Borja. Joe, Director Borja, on the current footprint of global recycling, I know you might not have the top of your head, but would you possibly have it off the top of your head what their footprint is? Because that's Chamorro Land Trust under a lease, right, for that operation?
You mean in terms of acreage?
Yes, in terms of acreage.
I'm not sure. I
Okay.
don't have that. I know that there is some vacant area to the south of it, but for the operation right now, that global recycling, I'm not sure what the acreage is.
Okay. Can you get back to the committee on that?
Sure.
Because here's what I'm thinking, and I was surprised, or I'm sure they're pretty busy, but I was hoping once again to see Gita, because they had a good recommendation, and I think, we're sitting here trying to reinvent the wheel, I think, on a piece of property where we can put these vehicles when we already have a recycling facility. Even if the contiguous property is such, maybe we can expand it, but maybe we have to go back to them. And I understand they do have a tax incentive right now. Can you get that back to us too, Daphne, on whether or not they're currently under any tax benefit provisions? Because what Gita had said is, look, you're going to have to probably get to the point to where you make this attractive for a company to come in and say, we're going to do this. We're going to become your junk car removal, operation on Guam. And the good thing is, at least if they're up to standard, we know that Global is doing the disassembly, doing the actual processing of the abandoned vehicle. So we wouldn't be putting our government in the liability of going to a place and storing, I really concur with the Attorney General's concern. We may be creating another problem by trying to solve a problem and putting a bunch of, junk vehicles on a place and not treating it. But why reinvent the wheel? Why don't we approach Global, if they don't have tax incentives, offer some tax incentives to expand their operation, and if their footprint currently can accommodate what we would be attempting to do, or maybe we even enlarge in their footprint, because you would want to keep that in a place that's already doing that operation and not try to contaminate somewhere else, and try to solve it that way. So, Mr. Boer, I appreciate if you can just come back to the committee with that, because we're going to have to tackle this on a multi-pronged approach.
That information would have to come from Chamorro Land Trust. They're the ones administering the property.
Okay.
But I just got a message that Globo is occupying 13 acres.
13 acres? Okay.
And
Well,
Senator,
yes.
also, 'cause this is how we talked with the acting governor, what you're exactly saying, to include also Lujan's record or Lujan salvage yard. And that is the perfect example also where years ago EPA cited them, and they're in some form of consent decree type situation themselves, but they have also provided that service that Guam needs. So the two we identified was Global and potentially Lujan's, but these are the people that have a history, the experience, and working with Guam EPA from a legislative point of view, whether you guys are rezoning and authorizing specific, like they did for the GPA when we had those rolling blackouts before, the legislature intervened, set aside the procurement law, and purchased those generators. In these type situations where Guam clearly has the problem with the abandoned vehicles, we're taking abandoned vehicles, creating a liability for ourselves when we don't take those fluids out and dispose of them, which have costs. I really think the legislature needs a bill comprehensively made with the legislature and the administration can solve many of these problems so people have an option to get rid of these cars without dumping them on the side of the road. Thank you.
Okay.
Madam,
So,
Madam Chair and Senator, if I
Thank
might interrupt you a few minutes. You know, the Attorney General's right. The auto recycling facility, as you mentioned, Madam Chair, that we're getting more vehicles than we're shipping out. It's almost a utility. It's almost a utility. It's almost a public utility to be able to get rid of these vehicles. Thank you.
I agree with that. So if we can get the help from all the partners, you know, this is the horse, and we're going to put a few carts behind it, because it wouldn't be even germane to put in the tax incentives and the other operations. I mean, I would suggest on the record right now, well, I think you should just go down to the front office and see if you can create a task force for this. But at least if you agree that we need to put something in law right now where we at least have the horse to pull the carts, put the teeth in there so the public knows, first and foremost, you know, we're not going to tolerate, particularly on rights of way, junk being discarded, because that's what it is after 48 hours. If we can refine this, keep it clean, get the statute put in place, and then we know we are now creating an obligation whereby the government has to step up, and we have to become creative on how we're going to solve this problem. But we already have tools in the toolbox. I mean, if we got Global doing the job, if they're not getting any type of tax break or incentive for what we're doing, why not? I mean, this is our problem. We got to deal with it. And then once again, like I said, if their current footprint would not do what's being done here, go to Chamorro Land Trust on the contiguous properties, ensure that they are also Chamorro Land Trust, expand that operation, because it's never going to end. I mean, gosh, guys, look now with the vehicles coming in from Asia, because of the, you know, the 25-year expiration, so the right-hand drive is allowed to come to Guam now. I mean, vehicles are all over the place, and it's just not going to stop in terms of the life cycle of a vehicle and everything else. So this is not something that's a one-shot deal, so I think we need a more comprehensive approach. But we're just asking for the assistance to get something out there that notifies the public that, you know, we mean business, that they cannot just discard them, and if they are, they're trash, so you're trashing our island, and then the steps to come proceed. And I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, if I could just make a last comment on Global and Lujan's, you know. Global, as far as I know, and I don't represent the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, but I don't think they have a valid license or lease, you know, to operate in that property. And then also Lujan's, their conditional use variance has expired, and they did inquire with the land management, the Guam Land Use Commission, about their operations there, and we encouraged them to submit an application to continue their operations legally. But, you know, the Attorney General has that valid point, is if we're using Global are we creating a liability, you know, for that operation, or for the government for that matter? Thank you.
Yeah, I would just share in response to that comment. I mean, that already exists, but I appreciate the comment. You know, maybe that's what this is going to do now, is clean up everything, right? Because the bottom line is if we have, as a government, are allowing that, we're just as liable. So we're already on the hook for it. So if they're not in good standing, we have businesses that are not in good standing, but we have footprints of property that are already doing this, well, clean up and come on board and right-size your business and do it right. We want to work with you. Or we're going to have to terminate whatever you have there and get a business in here that wants to do this, create an incentive for it to have some modest profit capability, because we're never going to not have to solve this. That's all I can say. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Senator Dueñas. Senator Brown.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I do have to ask a question because I've been wondering about this lately, and I don't know why, but you know, every now and then I think about things. Why do we register our vehicles? Because I got to go do that next week. I got to go, I don't know if it's still $94. I think last time I checked it was $94 to register my vehicle. Why do we do it?
So part of the registration process involves making sure that a vehicle has proper insurance. Also that they've passed a safety inspection if they're beyond a certain number of years in terms of, I guess, from the time that they were purchased and when purchased new. So what's involved in the registration process, again, just making sure that the vehicles are properly licensed and that they're safe to be driven on the road.
And hopefully to know who owns the vehicle, right?
Absolutely.
I assume if I get pulled over by, which hopefully hasn't happened in a while, but you never know, maybe tomorrow I'll get pulled over and ask me for my driver's license and my registration, because this whole idea of identifying who owns a vehicle, it obviously has become problematic, even though we're required by law to do it every year. And if you sell your vehicle, I think we should mandate, rather than, oh, I'm going to sell it to you, Senator Tello, and here's the paperwork, and then off I go. Maybe we need to do like a marriage license, and it doesn't become legal until both of us go up to Rev and Tax and file that I'm officially transferring the ownership of this vehicle to Senator Tello. And then Senator Tello becomes responsible. I think we need to put a mechanism like that in place, so this old story about, you know, I sold it 3 years ago, and, you know. We are becoming a community that I see that, you know, there's a lack of responsibility, and there's an expectation that scares me. Maybe that's why I'm a Republican. But it scares me with the idea that somehow the government, who we expect to do and be everything for us, is going to be the one to clean up after us. And that, to me, is you know, the government can't do an awful lot of things very effectively. So this idea that we no longer have any personal responsibility in this community is very bothersome, especially when it comes to waste. And I've been at the other end of Guam EPA with regards to enforcement. I've been at the other end at DPW as well. But I think we do need to set standards, and then we need to enforce them. I'm very much of that view, and I understand we never have enough resources. God, that story goes on. I can't wait to the budget hearings when I hear that from just near every director that comes before us. You prioritize for a period of time and you enforce, because I do also notice in human behavior that if we implement enforcement and people know it's going to happen, then all of a sudden they start modifying their behavior if they know there's direct consequence to them. I did that when we were at EPA. Same thing with DPW, even though I know it's a very complicated process because everyone will look at you, Mr. Ariel, and say, okay, you got to enforce this. Well, I remember taking weeks just to deal with someone getting a shipping container off public easement. Because, you know, it's 10 million reasons why I can't do it. But I really think we need to do that, and we need to zero in the enforcement aspect so people realize, oh, you just can't do that, because if you do that, there's going to be immediate consequence. And I think that's the one thing we fail to do as a government, even with limited resources to do it. Because I don't see the logic of going up, even though saying, oh, you know, make sure you got your insurance, because there's a bunch of cars on the road right now that are driving around that do not have insurance, have not gone through a safety check. And, you know, they get away with it for how long? Maybe till they get in an accident, and then the poor person that got hit ends up, you know, having to carry the bag. I just think we need to be a little more aggressive, because it is becoming, right now it is beneficial to abandon your car on the side of the road. Because what's the disincentive? Gov Guam's going to come knocking on my door and track me down? Good luck. And I think the more we are lax about, the more we continue to accommodate this sort of thing, the more we're going to continue to deal with this problem. So I just think, and I agree, I think any efforts we can do to address enforcement and direct enforcement, we should pursue that. And sometimes you just need to do it with limited. EPA should do that with its really limited resources, because that's, if people know you mean business, I mean, they're not going to mess with you if they know, you know, there's consequence. So I think we definitely need to be a little more aggressive. And Director Ariola, please do not use DPW's compound to collect these vehicles. I spent 2 years trying to clean that place. I don't know what it looks like now, but we had like, you know, 100 buses abandoned back there. We had, I don't know how many cars, how many police cars. I just didn't get around to the Guam Fire section because I got, you know, unexpectedly reassigned, but had I still been there, I would have taken care of that as well. But we really need to get a handle on it. We need to ensure personal responsibilities. If you want to go and buy that car, then by all means, you should be responsible for the time that car is in your possession. And when you decide, for whatever reason, it's met its life use, or you know, you're going to go buy a nice new shiny car and you want to sell the old one, then you need to be responsible for it. And I think we should include, Madam Chair, that requirement that the transfer of that vehicle is not official until it's filed with Rev and Tax, so that the seller of the vehicle and the intended purchaser of the vehicle, they go together and they sign over, and the seller's got something in his hand, and the one that receives it, that's purchasing, has got something in their hand that they are now responsible. Because this old story of, oh, you know, I sold the car 10 years ago, and I think we need to narrow that down. That's not impossible. We got to go get a marriage license. We got to go together. You know, we got to get a license, or we want to sell the vehicle, we just go up to Rev and Tax together and make sure that who the registered owner is. Because we need, if we're going to do all this, why bother if we're not going to be consistent and follow through with regards to the registration ownership of the vehicle. And then we should be able to track down who owns it. And, you know, if you're the last one that's registered, too bad, so sad, you get the penalty. We just got, you know, I'm sorry, I just have been around too long. I just think we're getting too lax about these things, and we get what we give. So I'm supportive of, you know, the issues that were brought up by the Attorney General, and I think we've got to make it work so that if his office can enforce it, by all means, I'm all for that. But also, you know, I recognize the issues brought up by Senator Chris Dueñas. So we need to move on these issues, because, you know, it's not acceptable. This is not the community that we want to live in. I think we need to just start enforcing and be effective with regards to that. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no further comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Okay.
Since EPA's here, one other thing that's been on my mind, I noticed I don't know who owns the property that's next to the former, I don't know if it's still the former current Fort Juan Muña that's down there at the Harmon. I went through there not too long ago. And I am taken aback by the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of junk vehicles that are there. Guaranteed most of them are not sanitized. Just 100% probably I'm right about that. And then I also noticed right on the side there's an area where the cars are being burned. So I'm assuming those are stolen cars that are being torched down there. And I'm like, what's going on here?
So we actually have an enforcement case open for that property.
Okay.
If you'd like to discuss it offhand,
yeah, no
we can
problem.
certainly,
Just, sorry, since you were here, I
yes.
thought I'd take advantage of the opportunity.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
But I would also like to report that just this week alone, we do have 6 enforcement cases on abandoned vehicles with our solid waste enforcement program. So there is some movement towards enforcement. And as you know, with any enforcement case, it starts with a violation, and then you find the alleged violator. And as we said during the roundtable, that's, you know, we're at a 50% success rate in finding the VIN number, to then which we contact DRT for the last registered owner. So this week alone, we've got 6 ongoing cases.
Well, I certainly hope you address that one, because it's sizable, and I can't imagine the amount of contaminants that are already in the ground as a result of those things sitting for years. But thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
And excuse me, Madam Chair, if I may, I know, Senator, you did bring up the issue of registration. So there are times that we cannot identify the individual who owns the vehicle because they were never registered with the Department of Revenue and Taxation. I can only, I believe that perhaps that is because maybe a vehicle was shipped into Guam. I will tell you, the port is really great at advising people who ship vehicles in that they must get a temporary permit in order for those vehicles to be driven off of the port. However, in cases where maybe those vehicles might be towed or they're not, or put on a trailer and they're not driven then perhaps those are the instances that cause those to be not registered. But we have run into situations where vehicles are actually not registered, so we don't have any owner at all for a vehicle. And I just wanted to make sure I shared that. Thank you.
That's why we want GPD to be looking at, your license plate to make sure you're registered. That's why I got to go register mine next week so they don't look at my car in particular.
And you
Okay,
could do it
thank
online,
you.
ma'am.
I appreciate the information. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Taitigui, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this piece of legislation. We've been working on this actually during the 36th Guam legislature. I think Senator Addett and myself has been working toward this. I've met with some military individuals because we were having problems with vehicles that were left behind by those individuals who were stationed here, and then they give their car to the next person, they give the car to the next person. It wasn't just Guam, but Hawaii was having the same issue as well. With those military members leaving their vehicles behind. So they decided to do a tagging of these vehicles going on base. They did some type of tagging scenario, just to ensure that the members are not leaving these vehicles behind and, abandoned, So that was one area. Another area we talked about was GPD. I'm surprised they're not here today because GPD actually, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Borja, in the 35th, they were talking about a new facility for GPD up in Jigo, and they actually identified property up there for an impounding lot. Because we're finding a lot of these vehicles that are being left behind, some of them could be involved in some kind of accident or a criminal investigation. And the mayors were saying that they were coming, the GPD was coming to the vehicle, looking at it, taking the license plate and leaving. And just leaving the vehicle there, not doing anything about it. So I think GPD needs to be involved in this discussion as we move forward, because the bill, even though there's a lot of concerns about it, mine is the enforcement of the agencies to provide the enforcement. I mean, we have fines that are implemented in this legislation, but enforcement, I think, is very important for the agencies. One of the other things I was looking at is, though we register, and we register every year our vehicles, all of us have to get our tags. If we do that, why don't we have a system where we have to deregister our vehicles? If we're required to register it, we should also have a mechanism that says we have to deregister it. This is something that happens in Singapore. And we all know how clean Singapore can be. You can't even chew gum without getting arrested, or spitting it out on the floor, But it's a process that actually is working in there. But of course, again, there's enforcement. And like the Attorney General said, a couple times that, these individuals who are dumping the cars on the side of the road, they don't care. They have nothing to lose. But if we can have that process in place, especially if a vehicle is flagged when it's 10 years old, that it's brought up. But I think that's something hopefully Rev and Tax might look into, and Madam Chair, to incorporate in this legislation is to deregister vehicles, regardless, Also, with regards to, I was quite taken back when I heard of, the areas, you talked about areas to place these vehicles. I mentioned about GPD supposed to have an area, but in some states, they actually the state contracts it's called tow yards. And this is areas where vehicles are taken, the government contracts a private company, they come and they pick up these vehicles and put it in their yard. And like the AG said, this could be a multi-million, business here if we do that. But some states, and if we look into it, they have tow yards. And it's something that we should consider as well. Who would run it? Would it be GPD? Would it be DPW? Not quite sure who would oversee something like that, but if we look into that. I know you're shaking your head, so go ahead, please. I know you have a comment on it. Yeah, please go ahead.
just to share something that the chief of police had shared with me, because they don't have an actual tow or a facility to hold these cars implicated in whatever traffic violation or whatever it is, they're actually just taking off the plates, from what I understand right now, on vehicles, I think unregistered vehicle or whatever the officer cites them for, and leaves the car on the side of the road. And then there's those that don't pick their cars up after. So we were talking about that, and this kind of dovetails if the legislature wanted to do a comprehensive disposal of these type of vehicles, to have a tow yard that can be either government run or privately bid out. Deal with GIPA, to me, is the greatest danger that the government faces, that even though we're taking these cars, if we don't dispose of them, like the property inventory that GPD has that's decades old, and our chief prosecutor is being tasked with getting rid of all this evidence from all these decades. The impound lots traditionally have been like a ghost yard of cars that were part of something, have been left there, another administration comes around, and they end up being a leaking hazard to the community. That's why if we're going to fix this for the abandoned vehicles and the junk vehicles, the government needs to have those fluids taken out of it, monitored by GIPA, and that's the conversations we were having with the acting governor. GIPA has to help us to certify people so that they don't come in all of a sudden and hit us with a $10 million or $20 million fine because there's leakage into the aquifer. So, yes, Senator, the GPD has a big concern about their own lot, but those are dangerous things to just take vehicles, keep them there, and then they turn out to be ecological problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I heard about how, taking out the fluids and stuff, so the liability issue is a problem. I do believe that what you mentioned, making it a criminal instead of a civil, it does move the process a lot quicker.
Because it starts the process, first of all, it gets their attention, it gets the attention of anyone else who would be doing that, then you get an immediate hearing before a judge. When you are in the criminal justice process, there's no way for you to easily try to, defer it, because a bench warrant will go out on you if you don't appear for those court hearings, unlike a civil proceeding where it could languish for years trying to give a summons to somebody. So anyways, it's a bit direct and could be considered harsh, but this is along the line. If you want to fix the problem, then look at who is putting those vehicles there and give some solution that quickly resolves it.
And I really believe that, we deal with traffic tickets all the time, our vehicles, and that's considered type of criminal, you're violating. It's as simple as that, a traffic ticket. And what happens? You go to court. And we all know that some cases are on a case-to-case basis with the situation that, okay, no, I did register this, the person did sign it off, I did get that they now own the vehicle, not myself, and I believe that, all the bureaucracy is the one that's been holding us back for all these years. And we all know that. We've been discussing this for over 4 years. So, yeah, we need to be enforcing, we need to provide incentives. This also provides better, public record keeping too as well. I mean, that's always beneficial to us, to basically be able to identify who the individual is. So it's the same thing as a traffic ticket. So I see no reason why we can't go down that rabbit hole with the criminal side. And like I said, case-to-case basis. So that being said, I don't want to delay it anymore, Madam Chair. I appreciate all the hard work, and I have a funny feeling we're going to be doing another roundtable, or moving forward on some type of legislation. If anything, we can move on requiring that vehicles be deregistered. That's a simple bill that can happen right now. There's certain things that we can do piecemeal while we work on the bigger picture. So I appreciate all your time today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, just for information for Senator Taitagui, the lot that she's referring to is lot 7054-8. It was to be an evidence holding area. It was previously Chamorro Land Trust property that was that allowed use of a company who promptly contaminated the site, and it's presently being cleaned.
Thank you, Mr. Borja.
All right, thank you so much, Senator Taitagui. So I did receive a message from the chief himself. He apologizes he couldn't make it today. But he states that they are building an evidence control section to store evidence, and any impounded car store there means that they are connected to a crime like fatal car crashes, homicides, robberies, rapes, for example, as an update. All right, so we're coming to a closing, and I just want to thank everybody for their patience and their hard work, I think, in giving out this testimony today. So, Stu's Maasi, we'll work with the bill, and we'll definitely send out amended bills for you to respond to. So, thank you so much for your time. Stu's Maasi, we're going to have a brief recess. Thank you. Buenas, the committee is now back from recess. So if we can have order in the order, please. So I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues that are here, Senator Fisher as well as Senator Parkinson. So we're on our third item on the agenda. It's bill number 76-37 LS. Excuse me. Sponsored by Senator William Parkinson, an act to amend subsection K of section 50102 of chapter 50, Title 10 Guam Code annotated, to repeal subsection D of section 50107, chapter 50, Title 10 Guam Code annotated, relative to removing the prerequisite training in order to attain certified pesticide license for the applying general use pesticides. So I'd like to recognize Senator Parkinson at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bill 76-37 LS seeks to remove prerequisite training in order to attain a certified pesticide license for applying for general use over-the-counter cleaning products. Upon further consideration, after speaking with some of the stakeholders, at this time we will be pulling this bill for later reintroduction after we do a little bit of retooling. With that, Madam Chair, I yield my time.
All right, thank you, Senator Parkinson. The committee will continue to receive written testimony until 4 p.m. Monday, May 8th, 2023. Please address all testimony to Senator Sabina Flores Perez, Chairperson on the Committee on Environment, Revenue and Taxation, Labor Procurement, Statistics, Research, and Planning. It can be dropped off at the mailboxes of the Guam Congress building or emailed to office@senatorperez.org. The committee will now adjourn the time. At this time, the time is now 12:15 p.m. So do us masi and have a great day.